The wind rolled across the wide plains, carrying with it the faint cries of coyotes and the rustle of dry grass. The night sky over the ranch was clear, with stars shining brighter than lanterns, but inside the grand ranch house, silence reigned. Thomas Wainwright, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, lay in his bed pretending to be asleep. His chest rose and fell in a careful rhythm, his face relaxed as though lost in dreamless slumber. Yet his mind was alert, every muscle tight with expectation. For weeks now, he had been testing the woman who had unexpectedly entered his life. Clara Monroe was a widow, left with nothing but a patched dress and 2 calloused hands after her husband had died in the mines. Desperation had brought her to his door one stormy evening, clutching her little boy to her chest, begging for work, not charity. Something in her voice had moved him that night, though he would never admit it to anyone. He had let her stay, given her chores, food, and a place to rest. But Thomas had seen enough betrayal in his life to be cautious. He had been tricked before, women who smiled sweetly and plotted behind his back, drawn more by the promise of his wealth than by loyalty or love. So, on this particular night, he feigned sleep to see what Clara would do when she thought he could not see. Would she rummage through his desk where he kept his ledgers and deeds? Would she slip into his study and count his coins? Would she peer at him with false tenderness, waiting for her moment to seize what she wanted? He told himself it was only a test, that his heart had no part in this. Yet deep down, beneath the pride and suspicion, he already knew that Clara was not like the others. Still, he had to be certain. The wooden door creaked softly, and his heart beat faster. Clara entered the room, the faint glow of a lamp in her hand. She moved quietly, careful not to wake him. For a moment, she just stood there, watching him. He expected calculation in her eyes, maybe greed. But what he saw instead, though his eyes were barely slitted, was sorrow and exhaustion etched across her face. She set the lamp down and reached into her apron pocket. Slowly, she pulled out a piece of fabric. It was a shirt. His shirt. The one with the torn sleeve he had worn that morning when repairing a fence. She had taken it to mend. Thomas's throat tightened as he watched her sit by the small table in the corner, thread a needle, and begin stitching by the dim light. Her hands trembled slightly, not from greed, but from weariness. Yet every movement was careful, precise, done with a kind of quiet devotion. She didn't glance at the drawer where his money lay. She didn't search his coat or boots. She didn't even let her eyes linger on the silver watch he had carelessly left out. All she did was mend the shirt of a man who, in her world, owed her nothing. After a while, she set down the shirt, rubbed her tired eyes, and rose to her feet. She walked toward the bed, and Thomas braced himself, still keeping his breaths even. She stood beside him, her gaze softening. Gently, she pulled the blanket higher over his chest, as though to guard him from the night's chill. Then, to his utter shock, she knelt by the bedside, folded her hands, and whispered a prayer. "Lord," she said quietly, "I don't know why you sent me here. I don't know if I can ever repay his kindness. But I thank you for keeping my boy safe tonight, for putting a roof over our heads. Bless this man, even if he never sees me as anything more than a servant. Bless him for the mercy he showed to a stranger." Her voice broke slightly, and she pressed her hand to her lips, silencing a sob. Then she rose, extinguished the lamp, and slipped out of the room, leaving him alone in the darkness. Thomas opened his eyes, staring at the ceiling. His chest felt tight in a way he hadn't known for years. He had expected to catch her in deceit. Instead, he had seen something purer than gold, something rarer than the finest horse or land, loyalty born not of gain, but of gratitude. That night, the wealthy rancher lay wide awake, not from suspicion, but from the realization that the poor widow he had doubted might just be the one woman in all the world he could truly trust. And for the first time in years, Thomas Wainwright felt the weight of his loneliness ease, replaced by a strange, humbling warmth he could not deny. The moon had climbed higher in the sky, pouring silver light through the wide windows of the ranch house. Thomas Wainwright lay still in his bed, long after Clara had left, staring into the darkness with thoughts heavier than the cattle herds he owned. He had lived alone for so long, surrounded by hired men who respected him, feared him, but never came close enough to know him. His wealth had built him walls, tall invisible walls that kept out both enemies and friends. He thought he was content with that, content to live out his days managing the land, watching over his herds, measuring life in seasons and profits. Yet the sight of Clara bending over that shirt, mending it with weary hands, had shaken something inside him he didn't know still existed. Sleep did not come to him. Instead, memory after memory rose, of the women who had courted him not out of love, but out of hunger for his land and money. He remembered their smiles, too polished to be real, their whispered words of affection that rang hollow once spoken. He remembered the betrayal of one in particular, a woman he had once thought might have been his wife, only to discover her sneaking letters to another man, plotting how best to claim part of his ranch. That wound had hardened him, made him cold, made him vow never to let anyone too close again. Yet Clara had stepped into his life like a shadow on a windy night, unexpected, fragile, carrying little more than a small boy and a desperate plea. He had given her shelter with suspicion, not kindness. He had waited for the moment her true colors would show. But tonight, pretending to sleep, he had seen nothing but honesty and quiet strength. She had prayed for him. No one had prayed for him in years. The next morning, Thomas rose before dawn, as was his habit. He dressed and went outside, the air sharp and cool against his skin. The ranch was stirring, ranch hands waking in their bunkhouse, roosters crowing in the distance. His boots crunched on the gravel path as he made his way to the barn. He found Clara already there, her hair tied back, her sleeves rolled up, feeding the chickens with her little boy tugging at her skirt. "Morning," Thomas said, his voice steady though his thoughts were tangled. Clara looked up quickly, her expression startled, almost guilty, as if she feared she'd done something wrong. "Good morning, Mr. Wainwright. I thought I'd get a head start." The hens were restless. He nodded, watching her for a moment. The boy, Samuel, peeked at him from behind her, clutching a wooden toy horse one of the ranch hands had whittled for him. The child's wide eyes reminded Thomas of simpler days long past, days when his own little sister used to run barefoot in the grass before fever took her. "You've been working hard," Thomas said finally. "Too hard, maybe." Clara shook her head. "It's no trouble. You've given us food and shelter. I only want to do my part." Her words were plain, without flattery or artifice. He found himself studying her face, the fine lines of weariness, the softness in her eyes that hardship hadn't managed to erase. She turned away under his gaze, busying herself with the feed. He almost told her what he had seen last night, the shirt she had mended, the prayer she had whispered. But something in him hesitated. It was too soon, too fragile. Instead, he cleared his throat. "I'll be heading out to the north pasture today. Some of the fencing's down. Might be gone till dark." She nodded, brushing her hands against her apron. "I'll see to supper." And that was the way of their days. Work, short conversations, small exchanges. Clara kept to her duties with quiet diligence, never complaining, never asking for more than what she had been given. Yet as the weeks passed, Thomas found himself noticing her more often. How she laughed softly when Samuel ran in circles chasing a stray chicken, how she hummed under her breath while kneading dough, how her hands, though rough from labor, carried a gentleness he had never known. He began finding excuses to linger near the kitchen when she cooked, to pass by the laundry where she scrubbed clothes, to walk slower when Samuel called out to him. And each time, a battle raged inside him, between the part of him that wanted to keep his distance, and the part that longed to draw nearer. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the fields in firelight, Thomas returned from the pasture and saw Clara sitting on the porch steps. Samuel had fallen asleep against her side, his small head tucked beneath her arm. Clara sat still, watching the horizon as though searching for something beyond it. Thomas approached quietly, his boots scuffing against the wood. She looked up, startled at first, then relaxed. "Long day?" she asked. "Always is," he said, lowering himself onto the step beside her. For a moment, silence stretched between them. The smell of dust and hay clung to the air. Crickets sang in the grass. Thomas glanced at Samuel, then back at Clara. "He's a good boy." Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "He is. Sometimes I think he's stronger than me. He never complains, not even when he's hungry, not even when the nights were cold." She paused, her gaze drifting to the darkening sky. "I keep telling myself he deserves better than this life. But I don't know how to give it to him." Thomas studied her profile, the quiet strength in her voice, the unspoken sorrow. "You've given him more than most children ever get. A mother who'll fight for him." Clara turned her head then, and their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. She quickly looked away, brushing Samuel's hair back. You're kind to say so. But kindness doesn't fill a stomach or keep a roof from leaking. Thomas wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that her love, her prayers, her endurance were worth more than money or land. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he said, if he ever lacks, it won't be because of you. Not while you're under my roof. Something flickered in her eyes then, something unspoken, something that made Thomas's chest tighten. She nodded softly, and they sat there together as night fell, an unspoken understanding forming between them. As the days turned into weeks, the rhythm of the ranch settled into something almost like family. Clara cooked meals that made the ranch hands smile and linger longer at the table. Samuel brought laughter to corners of the house that had long been silent. And Thomas found himself less lonely than he had been in years. But still, doubt not at him. He had seen too much to seek to surrender easily. Sometimes, late at night, he'd watch her through the crack of his door, wondering if one day she might break his trust as others had. Yet each time, she did nothing but her chores, nothing but care for Samuel, nothing but whisper her prayers. One night, as a storm rolled in across the plains, the ranch hands came rushing. With news, a neighbor's cattle had broken loose in the wind and rain, stampeding toward Thomas's north pasture. Without hesitation, Thomas saddled his horse and rode into the storm, rain lashing his face, thunder shaking the ground. Clara stood in the doorway with Samuel clinging to her skirt, watching him vanish into the darkness. Hours later, soaked to the bone, Thomas returned. He staggered into the house, exhausted, his arm bleeding from where a steer had struck him against the fence. Clara rushed to him without hesitation. She guided him to a chair, her hands firm and steady. Sit, she ordered, her voice sharper than he'd ever heard. She tore fabric from her apron, pressing it to his wound. Her eyes burned with worry. What were you thinking, riding out alone? You could have been killed. Thomas tried to brush it off, his pride rising. It's nothing. Just a scratch. Her gaze snapped to his, fierce and unwavering. Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare act like your life means nothing. The force of her words stunned him into silence. She bound his wound with care, her hands trembling only when she thought he wasn't looking. When she finished, she sat back, her face pale, her breath unsteady. I can't, she began, then stopped. You can't what? He asked, his voice gentler than he intended. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, meeting his gaze. I can't watch someone else I care about throw themselves into danger like that. I've lost too much already. The words hung between them. Thomas's heart pounded. She had said she cared. For him. He searched her face, and for the first time in years, he let himself believe it. From that night on, something shifted. Their conversations grew longer, their silences more comfortable, their glances more lingering. Thomas began to see not just a widow in need, but a woman of remarkable strength. Clara began to see not just a wealthy rancher, but a man scarred by loneliness yet capable of great kindness. Still, doubts lingered. For every moment of closeness, Thomas battled the voice in his head warning him not to trust too easily. For every prayer Clara whispered, she reminded herself not to hope too much. But day by day, their lives wove tighter together, like threads mending a torn shirt, stitch by stitch, quiet but strong. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, the ranch that had once been cold and silent was no longer just a place of work and wealth. It was becoming a home. The day came when Thomas could no longer keep the truth to himself. The weight of what he had seen that first night, her mending his shirt, her prayer whispered into the silence, pressed so heavily on his heart that he knew it would break him if he did not speak it aloud. They were in the barn, the smell of hay and leather thick in the air, the golden light of sunset slanting through the open doors. Samuel was outside chasing a stray chicken, his laughter echoing in the yard. Clara was brushing down one of the horses, her hands steady, her expression calm, though her eyes carried the same weariness he had come to recognize. Clara, Thomas said, his voice low, rougher than usual. She looked up, curious. There's something I've kept from you. Something I need to tell you. She tilted her head slightly, waiting. He stepped closer, every word heavier than the last. The night you first came here, when you thought I was asleep, I wasn't. I saw you come into my room. I saw you mend my shirt. I heard your prayer. Her hand stilled on the horse's mane. Her face drained of color, and she turned her eyes away. You You heard me. She whispered. I did, Thomas said. And it changed me. I thought you'd prove to be like the others, after my money, my land. I thought I'd catch you in greed. But, instead, I found a woman who prayed for me when she had nothing. Who gave more with empty hands than most do with plenty. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back quickly, as if ashamed. I wasn't trying to be seen. I only wanted to thank God for a roof over our heads, for keeping Samuel safe. I didn't expect, her voice faltered. I didn't expect kindness to come from someone like you. Thomas reached for her hand then, rough and scarred though it was. His fingers closed around hers with a strength that was not possessive but protective. You've given me more than you'll ever know. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost: faith, trust, hope. Clara, I don't want this ranch to be just mine anymore. I want it to be yours too. I want it to be Samuel's. I want it to be a home we share, not just a house you work in. Her lips trembled as the tears finally fell, silent and unashamed. She searched his face, looking for the catch, the condition, the doubt she was so used to finding in others. But there was none. Only truth. Only the raw honesty of a man who had tested her and found himself humbled. In that barn, surrounded by the quiet strength of the life they both had built from hardship, Clara finally let herself believe that love could still bloom out of loss, that trust could still rise from ashes. Samuel's laughter outside rang like a promise, and as Thomas drew her closer, the walls around his heart crumbled at last. The rich rancher who once feared betrayal, and the poor widow who once feared she had nothing left to give, found in each other not just survival, but a new beginning. The ranch, once silent, was no longer just a place of wealth. It had become a place of belonging, a place where broken pieces had been mended, like a torn shirt stitched back together, strong enough to last for the rest of their days.